Do you remember a couple episodes ago? It was when we were doing those trivia questions that I said I know the name of the dog, David Berkowitz's dog, and the breed.
Yes, yes, I
I'm
did.
laying in
And
bed. It was last night. I'm laying in bed, and I'm like, Harvey. It was Harvey,
Harvey.
and then I googled it, and it was Harvey.
Oh,
He was a black Labrador that
look at you
was telling
knowing facts.
Berkowitz what to do. A demon dog in his
A
eyes.
demon dog,
Yeah.
yes.
And it made me think. I was like, what would my dog say? Like Gilmore? I don't know.
Oh, Gil would just be like, I miss Aunt Melissa.
Oh, is it you think? I think it'd be
Yes.
more like he's Australian, so a cattle dog. So it's like, good day, mate. A lot of crikeys. Kill your neighbor. Okay, Bluey.
I'm not going to do an Australian accent and embarrass myself,
Can you
but
try?
absolutely not on here.
No. Our loss.
33, 1, 0. Main event of the evening. Wednesday and half past the hour.
It's Tuesday, and you're listening to Murder Unscripted.
What is up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Murder Unscripted. I am your host, Ed Hydock, along with the lovely Melissa Spivey, as always. And
Very lovely. Thank you.
that shirt's very pastel. Like, we look like Easter eggs with
We
these
do
shirts.
with our pink and green. I know. That was not
It
planned.
was not. I had a black shirt on. I'm like, that would be stupid.
I had
I
that
sh-
shirt on too, and then I changed because I didn't want to be like one with the background.
Yeah, just a half floating head.
Exactly.
So this week we are going to be wrapping up our block on hedonistic thrill killers, and we have covered a ton. That first week, Melissa, was absolutely brutal.
I don't
I
want to talk about it.
the horrific murder of Stanley Edwards, and I'm not gonna lie, that shook me. And I think our viewers can tell that too.
I don't know why it hit us both so hard, but it really, really did.
I think it shows that we tied it into like a personal. There was a personal connection, and because you know my kids and
Hmm.
I know my kids,
I would hope so.
I that it just I think when you make that personal connection, it just you put those kids in that same position, and that's when it starts to tear your heart apart. But
Yeah.
anyway, so then after that, we dug into the Lost Boys of Bucks County, which was a topic we're not quite done with. So there's one more little piece of the story that we're going to dive into today because it's incredibly interesting, and it offers some unbelievable kind of insight into the mind of Cosmo DiNardo, who was the focus. Kind of the boys were the focus, but Cosmo was the hedonistic killer we were focusing on. And this article, I firmly believe Cosmo was a hedonistic killer, despite what you're going to hear. And it really ties our July theme up quite nicely. So it brings us to February 25th, 2020. And to put you in a place in time, this is about 3 months after Sean Kratz, his trial happened and he was convicted.
This is also right before COVID, if anyone can remember back that far.
It was just a couple weeks before that thing took over the world. So I
Hmm.
remember vividly, I was standing in my kitchen and I got a text from the DP, which stands for director of photography, and essentially the cameraman, the guy running the camera for the Lost Boys documentary. And it was a link to a Philadelphia Magazine article written by Ralph Cipriano called The Untold. What is it here? I have it written down. The Untold Tale of Cosmo DiNardo's Descent into Murder and Madness. And I immediately forwarded it to Phil Claroni, who we had a conversation with in last week's episode. And Phil and I were both absolutely blown away by some of the information that came out in this article that we were not privy to when putting this documentary together. And Melissa, I know you were too. You were more of we hadn't met obviously yet. This was years
Right.
away from us meeting. So you were reading it more of just as an interested party.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this case has fascinated me from the beginning. So, of course, when this article came out, I think I had a Google alert for anything that was kind of Lost Boys related. And at this point, I'd kind of forgotten about it, honestly, because there wasn't a whole lot going on. And I got this, alert that something had been posted. And excuse me, I have read this article. So it's a really good article. I mean, it was the turning point in how I looked at these disgusting, despicable, horrific, cold-blooded murders. We're gonna go through the article. I do recommend that everyone read it. You can get it on phillymag.com. So we're going to start by breaking down the early days of July 2017, which is the time these murders took place. And that's what this article does. It kind of breaks down Cosmo's life starting in about 2015, 2016, leading up to the murders and the days in which the murders took place.
Right. And I think that was cool because in our story, we talk about the Lost Boys. This really dives into what Cosmo was doing and some of the
really does.
man, crazy stuff.
He was a deeply, deeply disturbed individual.
Yes.
All right. So we know that on Wednesday, July 5th, 2017, Cosmo DiNardo, and only Cosmo DiNardo, it was just him by himself, lured 19-year-old Jimmy Patrick to Cosmo's family's sprawling property in Solebury. Cosmo proceeded to then murder Jimmy and also bury his body there. So that was Wednesday, July 5th. We also know that on Friday, July 7th, 2017, Cosmo and his cousin Sean Kratz lured, brutally murdered, and then buried 3 young men, Tom, Dean, and Mark. So we have the 5th and we have the 7th. But what happened on July 6th, 2017? There's an entire day between these murders. Cosmo had to have been doing something that day, clearly. Well, do you know what he was doing, Ed?
I do, only because I read the article. I knew what he was doing, but to know the details of what he was doing was it rocked
shocking.
Me. It was like, wow, shocking. Yeah, very much so.
Well, that day, July 6th, Cosmo had a doctor's appointment with his psychiatrist. And it was on this day that Dr. Christian Kohler, who was at the time and is still practicing at University of Pennsylvania, he wrote in his patient log that Cosmo showed, and I quote, no clear risk to self or others, end quote. Clearly, the doctor missed the mark with his findings. Dr. Kohler had been treating Cosmo since November of 2016, so about 9 months at the time of the murders. And according to the article, the doctor was treating Cosmo for bipolar disorder, schizoaffective disorder, and schizophrenia. So that's a lot going on in the mind of a very young man. And
understatement. Yeah, that's a lot.
yes, that's a lot. And Dr. Kohler had prescribed antipsychotic meds for Cosmo, which he was kind of off and on in that time period from November 2016 to the murders. But he had also been committed to a psychiatric unit 3 separate times while he was under the care of Dr. Christian Kohler.
And that's what I was hoping you were getting to. I'm glad, man, we think alike. So I'm glad you got there.
Sometimes it's scary.
So it's troubling about the timing of this, how it fell in between those days. And I'm not sure if you've ever been to therapy, but I mean, the therapist is only going to know what you tell him. And like, it's only going to be able to work with the information that the patient gives him. So you can lie your way right through therapy. Like if you go there and you're trying to get help, it's one thing. You want to be as honest as you can. But if you're there because people are making you or you have to be, then it's not going to help fix you. But you can say whatever you want. And the psychiatrist, unless they're really, really good, probably isn't going to not trust the things you're saying. So you can paint yourself in any kind of light that you want. So I wondered when I read this article do you think that maybe that's what Cosmo had done a bit, was like really downplay the thoughts he was having and his own mental health to make himself seem like not so much of a psychopath?
You know what, though? The psychiatrist, I think, should know that people can do that. And I think that they should look around that. And I think, I mean, I'm only going to go into 10% of the horrible things that he did. And I think that if these are all true and the psychiatrist knows about all these incidents, it doesn't matter if Cosmo was standing there and saying, I am completely fine, everything is great. Like, all these other things are happening. Actions speak louder than words, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
I agree. And I just don't, having not been sitting in that appointment or really knowing Cosmo personally, it's hard to tell we read about these actions that he was and these things that he was exhibiting, but until you see them, I can't really form my own opinion because I'm as a member of the media, I mean, I know how things get twisted, and it's like you're reading this article, and when you're reading it, you're wondering if this does just fall under the family trying to cover their butts and pull out any little facts they can to help their cause or the image they're trying to portray of Cosmo and their situation. So it's hard to make an educated assumption, but just based on what I know about the case, I wonder if he was faking it. But like you said, they should know better.
I
Psychiatrist.
think, yeah, personally. But all right, so on July 6th, the day in between the murders, was also on this day that Dr. Christian Kohler decided that Cosmo no longer needed his meds. We should also point out that while Cosmo was in the waiting room that day, patiently waiting to see Dr. Kohler, he was on his iPad, Googling information on Mexican drug cartels and how they dispose of their victims in vats of acid.
The exact terms he searched for were soup maker cartel. And that was, I'd never heard of that. So I looked it up, and it was a reference to a Mexican drug syndicate that had actually done this to about 300 people, where they dissolved their bodies in barrels of acid. So, mental health or not, Cosmo was fully aware of what he was doing every single step of the way, even the days in between these murders. And it's a trait that most hedonistic killers do possess. So I know he's in there dealing with mental health issues, but at the same time, damn.
This kid was clearly going through it. That is
Yeah.
the gentlest way I can put it. But I mean, according to this article, 2015, 2016, especially 2016, was really the year from hell for Cosmo. He went through a lot. He had a breakup, but he also had several concussions. He was a football player, and he had several concussions from that. And he was involved in an ATV accident. And due to the accident, and also due to some of the medication, like he had the accident, he was in a wheelchair. He essentially became depressed. So then he was on depression medicine, which made him gain over 100 pounds. And then he got more depressed.
Yeah. Have you seen the pictures of him like skinny?
Yes.
When he was big on Facebook, very active. Not always in
Mhm.
the most what's the word? Appropriate ways online,
Yeah.
but he
Some of those
definitely didn't.
pictures.
Yes, but he took a selfie one time that was he was fairly in good shape, and then the pictures of him later were just he blew up. He blew up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I think it's a cross between inactivity from being in the wheelchair after the accident and the medicine. It was just kind of a bad combination. So, but after this accident, he started being physically abusive to his mother. He was physically abusive to nurses and staffs on the times that he was hospitalized. At one point, according to the article, he believed his mother was a Russian spy. And another time, he was convinced she was poisoning his food. There's mention of a time that she was driving him, I believe, to a doctor's appointment, and he jumped out in the middle of traffic saying like she was trying to kill him, and it was this entire thing, and it was just insane. And the Philly Meg article talks about how in December 2016, so 7-ish months before the murders, Cosmo was off and on his meds, and when he was off them, he was not only making like really foul, disgusting sexual comments to his mother, but then he was also talking about killing people with a chainsaw, chopping off their head and feeding their remains to alligators.
Yep.
And yet, by the end of March 2017, Dr. Kohler believed that Cosmo was improving and that his bipolar disorder was in remission.
And it's important to mention that the article also talks about the fact that when Cosmo was on his meds, he would come down the steps. Good morning, mother. What's for
Hi,
breakfast
Mama.
today?
Yeah.
Hi, mom. So it's she mentioned seeing both sides of him, and it's scary that somebody can flip a switch like that and
Yes.
turn into what Cosmo DiNardo turned into. So it's just a shame for all
Well,
parties involved.
and the article, like I said, mentions the concussions. It doesn't go into much more detail, but something I wanted to bring up, and we are absolutely going to do an episode on this in the future, head trauma. That
Yeah.
Cosmo had several concussions during his high school football days, the ATV accident, And in a text message sent by Sandra to a family member, Sandra wrote that she believed the accident made Cosmo a different person. And Ed, I am so convinced that head trauma is a huge factor in how a killer becomes so deranged. Like if you look at John Wayne Gacy had head trauma, Cosmo's having head trauma. There's so many of these killers that had head trauma when they were between the ages of, I don't know, 8-ish to 20-ish, somewhere around there. So I almost feel like Cosmo had two lives, like one before the concussion and ATV accident, when he was supposedly a great, kind, helpful kid, and then his life after that, where he took the lives of 4 young men and just destroyed so many families and just destroyed people.
Yeah, the article hearkened to a neighbor who said every time I would come home with groceries, Cosmo would be outside. He'd help me bring them in, and he was always so respectful and so nice. And then the story about his mom and the boy that she'd seen, and just it immediately made me think of. Do you know who Chris Benoit is?
He was a wrestler.
He was the wrestler,
Right,
right? So
yeah.
he was but he murdered his wife and son one day
Mhm.
out of the blue. It was this huge news story and a lot of mystery surrounding it. And Chris was notorious. I think even at his autopsy, they found it in his system, steroids, anabolic steroids, along with prescription pills. But many thought it could have been roid rage that caused Chris to flip out and do this to his
Mhm.
family. But his autopsy did show that he had CTE, which I had to look it up as to what this is. So chronic traumatic encephalopathy. Encephalopathy.
Encephalopathy. Yes.
So CTE. I always call it CTE. So and
Yeah.
it was he also had damage to all 4 lobes of his brain and his brain stem. So it's a disease that affects many pro athletes, and you hear about it a lot in football because of all the
Mhm.
contact. So it's these players that they end their careers and they struggle then for years, and it can kill them. So while I am sympathetic to Cosmo's head injury, at the same time, the amount of pre-planning that went into this, it kind of throws all those excuses out the window for me. I mean, he was pure concentrated evil, no matter how he got to that stage. And I do feel bad for his parents. That's the one thing the article did make me kind of change my tune on that. I mean, his mom at least. His dad was a
His
cheating piece of
mom.
shit. Yes,
Yeah,
his
not his.
mom is no, not his dad. But Cosmo's mom, Sandra, it sounds like she really did try to wrangle him and get a handle on him, but or at least that's the way the article that's what it makes you believe that she did.
And at one point, Sandra quite literally begged Dr. Kohler to help her, saying, quote, "I can't go home with him. He's going to kill me. And I'm not going to make it home alive." End quote.
That's terrifying to think about your own son having to imagine that car ride. Like if he was like, well, "You'll be fine." I'm sure he was just like, "Everything's fine. He's under
Yeah.
control." Some canned response, and then she had to drive home terrified of her own son. I mean, I can't even if that's true. I can't even imagine.
But here's the thing though. She says this and I don't doubt it. I can't even imagine how terrifying it must be. But then they went back to that home where she had her gun.
Right.
And he was
Unlocked.
not supposed to have access to guns. It's
Right. And
actually, I believe, go ahead.
that was the basis for the civil suit is that you see all these problems, but still you're giving this kid who has all these crazy violent tendencies access to these things that he shouldn't have access to.
Right. Like, what the hell is wrong with you to do that? And
Right.
and don't even get me started on Anthony. We talked a little about his affair in the last episodes, and this is absolutely 100% speculation, my own opinion, but I think that the affair definitely made everything worse, especially for Cosmo. I mean, Cosmo and Anthony, his father, engaged in actual physical fights over this affair. And
Mm-hmm.
there was a story about how like Cosmo went after the woman's car and started like smashing it with a baseball bat. And
Yep.
I mean,
Cosmo was definitely not happy with his father's indiscretions, and I think that I personally think that led to a lot of what happened.
and that's a shame. I mean, you can tell Cosmo was obviously he loved his mother and felt very protective of her, but like at the same time, then he thought she was trying to poison him. So you can see where he is essentially two separate people. He's two separate Cosmos. And it's things like that that mess with me.
There was a story that came out at trial. So I'm sitting in this trial, and Anthony took the stand, and it was weird to see him because I had my preconceived notions about him, and I thought he really dodged every question because
Mm-hmm.
they weren't. The facts were skewed more toward what was happening on the farm and less about what Anthony was doing. But there were stories that came out that are just, it's like, man, I'm hesitant to reveal them here only because I don't, some of it I only remember bits and pieces,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't want to go too much. But there was a story where in between some of these murders, Anthony pulled into the farm with a mistress and
Yes.
saw the boys there and turned around. But Cosmo saw him pull in with this woman in his car.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, and this is happening while Cosmo's already flown off the handle. So
Right.
it kind of exacerbated what was already happening.
Right.
Anyway, we'll leave it at that.
No, I agree with you. And you know what? It's things like that that mess with me. Like, it's like one of his. I hate Cosmo, and I'm gonna be honest. I hate his family.
Yeah,
It is what
me
it
too.
is. But you know what? It's like one part of his brain was. It's like Jekyll and Hyde. One part of his brain was so in love and protective of his mother, and the other part thought she was against him.
Right.
And so right there, it's so conflicting. And what he did was horrible and disgusting, and the most inhumane thing you can do. But his brain was very clearly his own worst enemy.
Hmm.
But
That's a great way to put it.
yeah, but the problem is, even with all of these incidents, and there were so many more, why did he still have access to the weapon?
Lock it up. All guns, all guns. I am all for owning guns and using them responsibly, but lock them up, especially when you have kids. And I know Cosmo's older. He wasn't a kid per se, but you have
Mm-hmm.
a family member who can gain access to those things. And with the mental health problems that he had, lock that gun up.
I don't know if you knew this, but at one point, Cosmo took an AR-15 and like hunted his father. And during one of the 3 times that he was institutionalized, Cosmo literally said to doctors, and this was like about his family, quote, "If I had a gun, I would kill them all." And
It's so disturbing. There's signs that I cannot believe got ignored. I cannot believe these things
mm-hmm.
went unchecked.
I agree. And it's a disturbing glimpse into what makes hedonistic killers like Cosmo tick, I think. And at the end of the day, I'm glad the DiNardo family wasn't able to profit from any of this through lawsuits. So we talked about how they were trying to sue University of Pennsylvania and Dr. Christian Kohler. And basically, Sandra DiNardo was the power of attorney over Cosmo. And so she was suing the doctor, but they couldn't get any money off that because of a law in Pennsylvania called the no felony conviction. I think it's in all 50 states.
I
But
don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I know it's in Pennsylvania.
yeah, so it's the no felony conviction recovery rule, which states that a plaintiff is barred from profiting and or beneficiating via civil laws of his own criminal conduct. Which it
Yeah.
also goes for if he were to write a book, he could not get any of the proceeds of that. So, that's
Right.
like another aspect.
And that was
Or
because Sandra was his power of attorney. I think that family got lumped in. That created this legal kind of snafu where they couldn't profit either. So while they were suing this doctor, they couldn't because
right,
technically what their son did was the motive for this whole thing, the whole lawsuit. So if this doesn't happen, the lawsuit never happened. So it's like your own actions can't lead to profit monetarily.
right.
Yeah. So
And you
it's
shouldn't be
a
able to profit.
no, I agree. And it's a troubling, I don't know. The whole thing, was very disturbing to hear what was going through Cosmo's mind. And I watched the mom testify. I watched her get up on the stand and
Mm,
she was broken. And you want to believe as a parent that you tried your best. And I don't, I want to believe they tried their best, but they made some serious mistakes along the way. And so did the medical community. I mean, so did this Dr.
absolutely.
Kohler. Mistakes were made across the board. And I am glad it's over. I'm glad the families can move on. And I'm glad that no one was able to profit from this case because of Cosmo's actions.
Right. Absolutely. So, while we're on the subject and we're kind of finishing out hedonistic thrill killers, I have one more case that Ed, I'm going to share with you and our listeners. And you and I talked a little bit about it. It's about a hedonistic thrill killer who, when asked by police why she committed this gruesome act, she simply responded with, quote, "to see what it felt like to kill someone," end quote.
This already has vibes of Stanley Edwards, and I swear to God,
yep.
if you do that to me again, we're ending the show after two blocks, and I can't do this anymore.
No. I promise I'm not. I'm actually, because it's a very well-known case, I'm not, and just because it's so, there's just so much to it, I'm not going to go into much detail. I would say, though, if you are interested in more of a deep dive on this case, you can listen to the podcast Inhuman. That's one of like my favorites, and it's episode 189. And the hosts, Andrea and Haley, they always do really informative, in-depth research, and their delivery is incredibly respectful, but also very friendly and relatable. So that would be a good place to go to listen to find out more about this case.
Did you just outsource the case?
I did.
You're like, I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail, but if you'd like someone else already did it.
Work smarter, not harder.
Here's a link to that website.
I am going to link them. They're great.
Perfect. Great.
They don't know we exist, but that's okay.
No, that's fine. Half my family doesn't even know we exist.
It's true.
They know I exist, not the pod.
So many things I didn't want to say, but we're on a time limit here.
Yeah, let's go. Get cracking. Where's this case?
So for now, I'm just going to talk about like the main points of the case, and that is the death of 9-year-old Elizabeth Olten, who was horrifically murdered by 15-year-old Alyssa Bustamante. And yes, I said 15.
Yeah, this is a famous case. And it draws so many parallels to Stanley Edwards and also to the Lost Boys. It's got, you have all three of these killers at some point just admitted to killing people just to see what it felt like. Yep. And also similar to Stanley Edwards, the victim in this case, Elizabeth, she knew, I'm sure a lot of our fans know the Bustamante case. It's just it's one of those names you just know. But Elizabeth knew her killer. She looked up to her, trusted this older girl. And we talked about that during that first episode. When you're a kid and an older kid shows any interest in you, it's just like you're absolutely beside yourself with excitement. Yes. So it's tragic because all of these cases have very similar circumstances.
Oh, absolutely. So this crime took place in October 2009, and it was in St. Martin's, Missouri. Elizabeth, 9-year-old Elizabeth Olten, she was smart, she was sweet, she was like this precocious little 9-year-old, and she was the youngest of 5 kids, and apparently she loved dogs, she loved Hannah Montana, she loved Taylor Swift, which I'm like, we're basically describing me.
Yeah.
Same girl, same. So Elizabeth and her family lived just a few houses down from Alyssa. And then Alyssa and her 3 siblings. She had a 6-year-old sister, and then she had twin brothers who were definitely younger than her. They were somewhere in between Alyssa and her sister. But I don't know how old they were. So there were 4 of them all together. They actually lived with their grandparents. Their father was incarcerated, and their mother was struggling with substance abuse. So they were, I believe their grandparents had like legal custody. Mm-hmm. So just like with Cosmo DiNardo, there were definitely signs that Alyssa was struggling with her mental health. I mean, personally,
Can we touch on the fact that the Jimmy Patrick was also with his grandmother, this Sharon, because of his mom having mental health issues?
Oh my gosh, you're right. The
Crazy.
Parallels are insane.
Right.
Well, another parallel, just like Cosmo, Alyssa, there were these, okay, I'm going to be honest. Personally, I feel like Alyssa's red flags, I feel like you could see them from space, but I'm not a parent or a guardian, and I wasn't there. And I'm sure that it's harder to see. It's easy for me to say it because I know what's going to happen. But as a parent,
it's easy to overlook those because you want to give your kid the benefit of the doubt. So you see signs, and I don't know, just to get personal, I've seen little things come up with my kids over the years. Nothing obviously like this, but other more I don't know, less what's the word I'm looking for? Like things that don't really
less
matter.
intense.
They
Yeah,
less
little
intense.
minute, innocuous.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you want to try to brush them off because like you don't want to believe that your kid is that person. Maybe they're just going through some things, or they're acting a little bit differently, and you try to correct it. You try to talk to them, you comfort them, try to find out what's going on and get to the root of it. But at the same time, you never think that like these things are going to lead to this,
Right. That's
something
fair.
so awful. And it's maybe that's what was going on.
Well, an example of these, what I think were cries for help, she had a MySpace page and a YouTube account. And according to sources, under the part about her interests or hobbies, she listed cutting and killing people.
And isn't that like why don't people speak up when they see these things? It astounds me. Like maybe do they
Yeah.
just think it's cute or just talk kind of like when do you remember when we were talking about Todd Rizzo, where his supervisor, when he heard his goals and it was to
Oh, in the
marry a black
military.
woman. Yeah, marry a black woman and to kill him, see what it felt like to kill somebody. And he was just like, huh, that's weird.
Oh,
So
weird. Yeah.
yeah, I just don't know. It's like if someone would speak up then, and even then, I don't know what could be done about it, but at least it would be out there and it would go up the chain a little bit more.
Right. And I mean, it's not like her grandparents didn't do anything. She was seeing a doctor and she was on medication. So, but sources did talk about how she did engage in self harm and she had actually carved the word hate in her arm. I saw somewhere that when nurses examined her at some point, she had so many cutting marks and scars. She also had selfies online where she was holding her index and middle finger to her head, like she was shooting herself in the head. A lot of people bring up the fact that she has like heavy black eyeliner on and lipstick like the Joker. And I'm like, okay, it was the 2000s. We all wore heavy black eyeliner. So I don't think that's fair to jump to that conclusion.
No, but if these parents are, I hate it's so hard not to you want to blame the parents in all of these cases, but at the same time they need to be, parents in general need to be fully aware of what their kids are doing online. So
Yeah.
these pictures, if I ever caught my son posting anything like this, first of all, that internet gets shut down. Like your access gone. So because a lot of it I believe is for attention, especially when you're in the teen years. Some of these things you're doing just to show people that you're awesome. Like look at how hard I am and how tough.
This was 2009-ish, and it was her grandparents. And I know in 2009, my grandparents didn't know how to use the
Well,
internet.
true.
Just
That's a good point.
devil's advocate.
They're trusting. Yeah.
Right. So anyway, in 2007, Alyssa was hospitalized for attempting suicide. So this girl was clearly struggling with her mental health. And it should be noted again, mirroring Cosmo DiNardo, Alyssa was being actively treated for her depression, and she was prescribed fluoxetine, which is the generic for Prozac.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Yes. And her doctor actually increased her dosage shortly before this case takes place.
Wow.
So, paralleling Stanley Edwards' case, just like Todd lured Stanley to his backyard to hunt for snakes, and Cosmo lured the boys to his farm, Alyssa lured Elizabeth into the woods by telling her she had a surprise for her. And it's even more messed up because Alyssa actually convinced her 6-year-old sister to ask Elizabeth to come out and play.
She used her as a pawn. That's awful.
Yeah,
Awful.
she essentially used her little sister to lure this poor child out of the safety of her home with her mom and her family and her siblings. And
God.
She had no idea. It's your 6-year-old friend coming to ask you to play. Why would you not? And her mom was originally apprehensive and wasn't going to let her go, actually.
Wow. The guilt that mom is living with.
And I feel like you always hear that.
Because you don't know. You don't expect anything like this ever.
No, but go with your gut, people.
Yeah.
So once Elizabeth left her house with Alyssa's sister, Alyssa came up to see the girls. And Alyssa actually somehow got rid of her sister. I don't know what she said, but she sent her home. And Alyssa asked Elizabeth to come into the woods for a surprise. Apparently, she told Elizabeth that she needed to show her something, quote, really neat, end quote.
So sad.
So, exactly. So just a short time later, 15-year-old Alyssa Bustamante strangled, stabbed, and cut the throat of 9-year-old Elizabeth Olten. A 15-year-old cutting the throat of a 9-year-old.
I'm not doing this again, so I'm gonna sit here and listen because
I got
when I start to talk about it, it's
It's too
not
much.
easy. It's too much. Yeah, it's not easy.
Well, when Alyssa was finished murdering this adorable little girl, she buried her body in a very shallow grave that Alyssa had actually dug the week prior.
Wait,
And
so she dug she was planning this before?
oh, absolutely. This was
Wow, this wasn't a
planned.
spur of the moment thing.
Nope, this was
I didn't know
planned.
that.
Now, this next part. So she had actually dug 2 graves. And well, we don't know for sure the reasoning behind the 2 graves. I do remember reading, and this was like on Reddit, people, so don't quote me or don't take this, take it with a grain of salt. But I do remember reading years ago that there was speculation that she was possibly planning on killing her twin brothers, and that's why there were 2 graves.
That makes sense because you
Absolutely.
shallow graves. I feel like when you hear about them, it's after the fact. So it's like a you've killed someone, now what? And that's when because they find a hole and they toss him in, and half the body pops up very quickly
Right.
because between just the land pushes it up, and animals uncover it,
Rain.
and yes,
Yes.
rain, it erodes away. So it's shallow graves. I feel like are usually less premeditated. They're more of like something that people do when they don't know what to do with a body.
Absolutely. Well, no, she had it already dug. So when Elizabeth wasn't home by dark, her mom, Patricia, knew something was very, very wrong. First of all, Elizabeth had promised to be home by 6 p.m. And she actually had a cell phone, so she would have known what time it was. And not only that, but Elizabeth was terrified of the dark, and there is no way in hell that she would have ever stayed out in the dark. So
Hmm.
Patricia called the police, and it seems like law enforcement jumped in immediately, which is so great to hear. I'm
Good.
so glad we didn't have to hear, "Oh, I'm sure she'll turn up,"
Yeah. Young
But
girls, that's always, even young girls, boys, whatever. That young, when stuff happens, I feel like there's more of a response. It's like the same reason that networks discriminate against kid cases. It's the police departments put extra emphasis on this, like because they're not adults. There is no reason they would just go missing. So I feel like they get more. You rarely hear about a young child, something happening or going missing, and police don't respond. So it's good to hear. It's refreshing.
I'm just glad to hear that
Yeah.
because, yeah. Um, so they threw everything they had at the search for Elizabeth. I mean, even the FBI was brought in to assist. So they didn't actually find Elizabeth's body for 2 full days, but investigators pretty quickly figured out that Alyssa had something to do with Elizabeth's disappearance. And they were able to get a search warrant for her grandparents' home and to search her room. So during this search, they took several items, including clothing, they took her bedding, they also took her diary. Just a trigger warning. We're going to be talking about violence against children, which we've kind of been talking about the whole time, but I
Yeah.
do want to give a trigger. This next part's really messed up.
This whole thing should just be a blanket trigger warning, this whole
Right.
block.
Well, Alyssa had written a diary entry on the day that Elizabeth disappeared. By the time the investigator sees the diary, Alyssa had scribbled over it, like in pen. But what Alyssa didn't realize is that just by scribbling out the letters, you can still see the imprint of what was
Hmm.
written, or like you
We're
can hold it up to the light.
we're still dealing with a 15-year, like, again, these
Right.
we've this came up in Stanley's case too, with a young perpetrator. It's like their actions, the cover up they think are these great cover ups. There's so many holes in their plan just because
Mm-hmm.
they don't know any better. They think they're outsmarting people, but they're not.
Yeah, she definitely wasn't. So
Yeah.
investigators could read pretty clearly what Alyssa's diary entry said. I'm going to read it to you. It's quite descriptive. The entry reads, quote, "I just fucking killed someone. I strangled them and slit their throat and stabbed them. Now they're dead. I don't know how to feel at this moment. It was amazing. As soon as you get over the, oh my God, I can't do this feeling, it's pretty enjoyable. I'm kind of nervous and shaky though right now. Kay, I gotta go to church now. LOL. End quote.
It shows a complete disassociation from the real world. And when you read that,
Yep.
it's almost like it's incredibly insightful actually to what we're talking about, because it's like there's two different people living inside her head. You have
Mm-hmm.
the real life persona that has chores and school and responsibilities, and then the other person that no one sees that's basking in these kind of dark fantasies. And it's terrifying is what it is. I mean, that these
Oh,
people are out there
absolutely.
and that this is how they're programmed to act.
Well, and to write that, it was amazing. And she spells it AHMAZING. And feeling it's pretty enjoyable. Come on. And Kay, I gotta go to church now. LOL. You just brutally murdered a 9-year-old, and you're sitting here writing LOL.
And at the same time, if they were the victim, they would be pleading with their attacker, "Don't do this. I'm just a kid." Blah blah. But at this, then on the flip side of things, when they're in control, it's this great, amazing feeling. Like they just don't
Ugh.
they don't know what it's like to be scared or
But
to
right
feel.
there
Mm,
is the hedonistic thrill killer. Right
absolutely.
there in her own writing. Doesn't get much more evidence than that.
Evidentiary evidence.
Evidentiary than
All
that.
the evidence.
All of it.
That's some evidence there.
So I watched Alyssa's interrogation video, and oof, it was brutal. During the interrogation, she did eventually confess to murdering Elizabeth, and she tried very hard to be calm, cool, and collected, and tried to, joke kind of with the investigator. And she did eventually confess to murdering Elizabeth. Unfortunately, this confession was later thrown out by a judge due to some issues during the interrogation, not by the investigator questioning her. So essentially, in the state of Missouri, and I don't know how many states do this, but in Missouri, if I understand this correctly, it seems like any juvenile being interrogated must have a juvenile officer to sit in on the investigation to ensure like no laws are being broken and that the juvenile's rights are violated, which heyo, foreshadowing, juveniles, interrogations, confessions. That's kind of a hint about what's to come in Block 3.
Mm,
But
so
anyway,
secretive, man.
so
So
secretive.
teasy. Ooh.
I know. So this juvenile officer is essentially just supposed to be in the interrogation room. They're supposed to sit quietly and observe the interrogation, and they're supposed to remain unbiased. Unfortunately, the defense team and the judge felt that Toby Meyer, she was the juvenile officer, led Alyssa to believe that she, meaning Toby, was Alyssa's advocate and that she was on Alyssa's side, when she really should have just sat there silently and stayed out of it,
So there
honestly,
was some,
unless,
yeah,
yeah.
impartial. There were some issues there with her taking a
Yeah.
side. Yeah.
And I watched the interrogation, and like at one point, Alyssa asked Toby what was going to happen to her. And Toby answered that with juveniles, they really try to lean towards treatment rather than punishment.
Yeah, he
And I
was
felt
out of line big time.
yeah,
Oh,
big time out of line, she.
Yeah.
And I kept watching it, and I'm literally sitting there going, shut up,
You
shut
can't say
up,
those
shut up.
things.
Why are you talking?
Don't say it.
Yeah, so, and I do agree. I felt like there were several times where she seemed to be comforting Alyssa. And the reason they don't want that is because they don't want Alyssa to make a false confession because she feels comforted, or
Yeah,
does that make sense?
you
Yeah.
can't lead a person of interest like that, 15, 20, however old they are. You can't tell them like nothing's going to happen to you. It'll probably be just treatment, like you won't go to jail, anything like that.
Right.
I know you're trying to make a child feel comfortable, which is great, but you also need to shut up and let the story play out as it's going to play out, because you can't make these promises and then they confess to something with the impression that they're not going to get in trouble, and
Right.
that's a big problem legally.
That happens so much where the
Mm,
investigators may say to the kids, you just tell me what happened and you'll be able to go home. And then they confess thinking they can go home.
right.
So because of this, and I do agree that she definitely was unethical. And also on the flip side, at one point, Toby, the juvenile officer, said to Alyssa something about, you need to tell us what's going on. We can't help you unless we know what's going on, meaning she was putting herself like with the investigators, like on the cop side, which clearly she is, but she's not supposed to look like that.
Right.
She's supposed to remain unbiased. So the confession was completely thrown out, but luckily they still had the diary and they just had so much more evidence. And back to the interrogation video for just a second. Alyssa's grandmother sat in on the interview. Oh my God. When Alyssa started admitting to the murder, and her grandmother's reactions were, if it happened in a movie, you would be like, that's too much. This is over dramatic. She was heart wrenching. The investigator's asking Alyssa how Elizabeth died. And he says, was her throat cut? And I held my breath for the answer. So I just imagine her grandmother, who's probably holding her breath as well. And when Alyssa answers yes, her grandmother lets out this heartbreaking moan and just wails, oh my God. And she ends up rushing out of the interrogation room.
We were messing her out. And she fell back and hit her head.
Was her throat cut?
Yeah. Oh. I can't believe.
Grandma?
Oh my God.
So the interrogation continues, but you can still hear the grandma like wailing from out in the hallway. And at some point, someone must say something along the lines of, oh, it's going to be okay. And you just hear her scream, it will never be okay. No.
I think you tried to dig the hole, like I said, and realized it was too hard to dig down that far.
I can't even imagine the pain that grandmother was feeling that day. I can't think of a worse thing for a grandmother to hear. And
No.
it changed that family forever. I know my grandmother growing up, they defend you to the death.
Absolutely.
You know, like I remember I got a speeding ticket one time and she was like, you probably had somewhere to go. It was, you know what? It's not your fault. You were in a hurry. So like they will defend you. But at the same time, if I ever had to admit something to this level, it would crush her. It would have crushed my family. But at the same time, everyone would have said, including my grandmother, would have been like, okay, now once the initial shock wears off, now it's time to man up, take responsibility for your actions, no matter how devastating it is to this family.
Oh, my grandma would have defended me.
Yeah.
She was like my best friend, so she would have written a letter to the judge.
Just you and your letters. That's where you get all your you've
yes,
started more letters to people. Stop it. No one uses letters anymore.
I'm gonna use them. I'm gonna bring it
Email.
back.
I'm bringing letters back.
I'm bringing them back. The Pony Express. So anyway, Alyssa was ultimately charged with first-degree murder, and she was charged as an adult. But shortly before her trial was to take place, she did take advantage of the plea deal that had been offered to her, and she pled guilty and was convicted with second-degree murder and armed criminal action. On Wednesday, February 8th, 2012, Alyssa Bustamante was sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of conditional release in 2024, plus a consecutive sentence of 30 years in prison. So, like, even if she were to get conditional release this year, because we are in 2024, which is terrifying that she could have been released, she still has to spend 30 years in prison.
Good.
So the earliest date that she could get released is 2054, and she would be 60 years old, which
good.
You still have a lot of life to live, though, at 60.
It's very generous. Very generous sentence.
I'm hoping that she doesn't get the condition. We need to look it up because I'm not sure when they will make that decision. But so that's the case of the murder of Elizabeth Olten and Alyssa Bustamante. And there's a lot to unpack here. First of all, the 3 cases we covered, the murder of 13-year-old Stanley Edwards, the murders of the 4 young men in Bucks County, and the murder of 9-year-old Elizabeth Olten, all had very significant parallels. I mean, all 3 murderers were young. They all seemed to be struggling with their mental health. We didn't talk a ton about Todd Rizzo's mental health. He's the one who killed Stanley Edwards. But we also have to remember this was mid to late 90s, and our understanding of mental health left a lot to be it still does, but
It's
it
true.
really left a lot to be desired in the 90s. And we also have to remember Todd did not come from a supportive home like Cosmo and Alyssa did. I mean, I know Alyssa had troubles with her biological parents, but it does seem like her grandparents tried their very hardest to give her a great life.
I agree. And I think the the biggest takeaway from this is that the callousness of all of these murders. I mean, the senselessness of it. The point that they were all essentially, all these killers said they essentially wanted to see how it felt to kill
Ugh.
somebody, and that is so troubling. And we just happened to pick 3 young killers. That was kind of a coincidence, but at the same parallels apply to adult thrill killers. That the entire reason was for fun and just to see what it felt like, and they had no reason whatsoever to commit these murders other than that.
You know what, though? I would love to find out how many hedonistic thrill killers, like what the average age is, because to me, it's probably more of a younger person thing because your brain is not fully developed yet. None of these kids, isn't it like 25 supposedly
25.
it takes?
Yep.
Yeah. So I feel like these kids didn't have, you should know the difference between right and wrong, obviously, but their brains weren't fully developed. They're on this medication. Cosmo and Alyssa were on medication for depression, which always says, can have harmful effects on children. And I just feel like they were so young and they don't understand that there's going to be repercussions for your actions. I hold them all accountable,
They
but
do
I think
now.
at the
Yeah.
time, because think about it, the worst thing they probably did before this was something silly, and they got in trouble and got grounded. Well, that grounding ends.
Yeah.
Prison time doesn't,
Yeah. I mean, if they didn't understand the consequences, they do now, and you can only hope that they are changed, even if they never again see the light of day. You hope that they found some kind of, I don't know, moral path while they were in jail. So
I'm not going to hold my breath, but maybe.
I wouldn't either. Well, Melissa, thank you for bringing us Elizabeth's story and helping us make sense of digging us into the mind of these monsters and understand a little bit about what makes them do what they do. So what it also does is it wraps up our block on hedonistic killers, and we hope you all enjoyed it. And if you did, drop us a like, drop us a follow, even hit us up on socials to continue this conversation, because it's an incredibly complex topic. And Melissa, do you want to remind everyone where they can find us?
Absolutely. So if you like this episode and want to hear more, please like and subscribe. We would absolutely love if you could leave us a review on your favorite podcasting platform or on YouTube. And actually, right now, we're sending out Murder Unscripted stickers to anyone who leaves a review.
They're sweet
so
stickers too.
They really are. I've sent out a couple, and it's so fun.
Yep.
So
you can request glittery ones or regular ones or shiny ones, holographic. Man, we're scratch and sniff coming up.
Yeah, that would be great. So all you have to do is leave the review, screenshot it, and send it to us. Don't forget to include your mailing address. But you can send these review pictures to murderunscriptedpod@gmail.com, or you can send it via a direct message on Facebook, Insta, TikTok, and we are at Murder Unscripted on all of those.
Why'd you whisper the address part?
Did I?
You're like, don't forget to send your address. Like,
Well,
real sneaky like.
No, but I had a couple of people, and I'm like, how am I supposed to send you your stickers, y'all?
Yeah. Well, next week we are going to be starting our 3rd block. Can you believe that we're in our 3rd block already? This is uncharted waters. So we didn't think this idea would make it this far. But the name of our theme for next block is undetermined, but it will focus on people who were considered suspects for years in cases but turned out to be 100% innocent. And I don't want this to be confused with exoneration cases, because that's a whole different ballgame. So we're going to stick to people who were considered people of interest for a lot of years, and so we're gonna dive into the cases that they were associated with, the devastation caused by the the spotlight being on them, even though they were not responsible for these murders, how the town felt, like how they were affected by everyone in town feeling like they were a cold-blooded killer. And
Right.
then in week 3, we're going to actually be having a conversation with someone who I became pretty close with after covering her sister's murder. And she was a suspect, the woman we're going to be talking to, for 20, 25 years in her
Wow.
15-year-old sister's murder. And she has quite the story to tell. So you will not want to miss that. It's going to be pretty awesome. So
Absolutely.
before we go, we like to end all these blocks with a little palate cleanser. And I know last time we talked about, we just did some trivia, some true crime trivia, and it gave
And I'm
us a
sorry,
chance.
what score did I get on that trivia?
I think 5 out of 5.
It was 5 out of 5.
It was, but they were easy. So
Okay.
I can assure you that I think you cheated personally, but I
How
can't
did I
prove that.
cheat?
I don't know.
I don't
You
get
go-
out much, so
You were looking at your phone. You were Googling down on your phone.
I was
while-
not Googling. Rewatch the video.
Okay, well, whatever. You somehow eked out 5 out of 5. And so this week we are actually going to play another little kind of true crime mini game, it gives us a chance to kind of shake off all these bad vibes, breathe a little bit. And so this week, Melissa, have you ever heard, I prepare these things for Melissa and I take great pride in trying to trick
boy.
her. So have you ever seen the Pokemon cartoon?
I mean, maybe like 25 years ago.
Okay, so before one of the commercial breaks in the show, they play a game called Who's That Pokemon? It's like, Who's that Pokemon? Where they put up a silhouette of a character from
Okay.
Pokemon, and the viewer just has to guess. They have very distinct features, so kids are like, that's Charizard, right? You can tell who it is. So I'm going to work on something similar for the YouTube audience, which it may look amazing, or it may, I don't know, it may look like garbage. But for the listening audience, I'm going to give you, you're going to have the luxury of some clues. So you're not just going to have to
Okay.
guess who the silhouette of a killer. So Melissa, are you ready to play Who's That Murderer?
I'm never ready, but you're going to make me do it anyway. So yes, I'm ready.
Here we go. Murderer. Okay, Melissa Spivey, who we established is the Wikipedia of true crime.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to start with an easy one. See, so you can get the hang of how this game is played. So are you ready?
I'm ready.
Murderer number 1. This killer was a Chicago pharmacist who turned a 3-story hotel into a torture castle, fitted with gas lines to knock out his victims, secret passages, soundproof padding, trapdoors, and torture devices.
H.H. Holmes, whose real name was Herman Mudgett.
Damn. What's the HH stand for?
I
Like
think it was Herbert Howard Holmes. But he had so many different aliases.
Well, you're right, regardless of how many aliases he had. You're correct.
H.H. Holmes and his murder castle.
Very good. All right, number 2. This Massachusetts murderer grew up with an abusive father and showed a penchant for crime at an early age. In 1965, he confessed to strangling and killing 13 women during the 1960s.
I have no idea. They all had bad childhoods and got beaten by their dads. Massachusetts murderer. I don't know.
I'm sorry, your first incorrect answer. Who is Albert DeSalvo, the Boston Strangler?
Oh, the Boston Strangler.
I couldn't give you any more clues. Massachusetts
You know what?
murderer.
I got caught up on the freaking dad thing because I was like, everybody had a bad dad.
It doesn't matter. You're wrong. So,
I'm wrong.
number 3. This murderer is known to have killed 9 women and girls during the 1970s, though some sources estimate his kill count as high as 50 to 130. But it was his 1978 appearance on the dating game that made him a household name.
Rodney Alcala.
It was Rodney Alcala. Fun
Dating
fact.
Game killer.
Yep, on the episode that Rodney was actually on, the contestant Cheryl Bradshaw chose him over the 2 other contestants, but declined to go on a date afterward because, and I quote, Rodney acted really creepy face to face. You think?
Girl, follow your gut. He was
Good
creepy.
move.
And those shows are so gross. I think he answered something like, it was like, if you were a fruit, what fruit would you be? And
Maybe like a chainsaw
no,
apple.
he was like, a banana so you can peel me. It was something really
God.
like stupid.
Cheesy. All those shows were awesome. I used to watch them all the time. Number 4. Known for neglecting his personal hygiene, this California murderer had 9 decayed teeth and was missing several others, a distinct feature identified by multiple survivors of his attacks.
Richard Stanky Breath Ramirez.
God,
Stanky Chops Ramirez.
You're
He's so gross.
you are correct.
Yeah.
Pretty good. All right. Last question, number 5. This murderer led a vagabond lifestyle as a sex worker before she was found guilty of murdering 6 men in Florida in 1989 and 1990.
Aileen Wuornos.
Correct. Very good, Wiki. Hey, that's just like Wiki. You're 4 for 5, so 4 out of 5 things. That's par for the course for being called the
Pretty
Wikipedia
good.
of true crime. Not
I
bad.
know, right?
That is all we have, ladies and gentlemen, for today's episode. So thank you again for following us along, and we hope you enjoyed the block that we had presented. And stay tuned. Next week we have a whole different theme to talk about, and a whole new a whole new can of worms.
Well, in the meantime, hug your friends, stay safe, and remember, perverts don't wear signs that say they're perverts.
I bet you a dating game guy had one on, and she was like,
He should have had one on.
"What's that sign mean?" He's like, "Nothing."
Nada.